I did not expect to be making this video, but I just can't lose with this deck. I talked about the V-Head list in my review of Headpool, and I thought it was just like, this is a pretty cool thing to do with the archetype. It's a nice space to play Headpool in. The more I've played this deck, the more I've become convinced that it has unlocked an archetype that we haven't actually played in Marvel Snap before. The more I play this deck, the more I think that this is like what Morgan Le Fay wakes up every day and wishes it could be. The overlap between Moira X, Headpool, Victoria Hand, and Moon Girl, combined with the fact that we are so powerfully able to discount death, means that this deck just straight up has a ton of point output in a really powerful way. Morgan Le Fay, an archetype that is in a very similar space, but I would argue is just flat out worse compared to this, came in second at the previous Golden Gauntlet. I feel like this is something that should be respected as an archetype, and part of the reason I'm making this video is because a lot of the reason I couldn't lose with this deck is nobody was respecting the point output that I had access to. This deck does points incredibly well. It would be comparable to Bounce. It would be comparable to Morgan Le Fay. That is what it feels like when I play this list, and I really want to highlight it in its own special video because my impression of it, my general read on it has only gone up since I covered it in yesterday's video that was specifically about Headpool. I have won 90% of my games I've played with this list. Granted, I have not played that many games with this list, but it's enough to know that this list is doing something that is legitimately powerful. Straight up, the numbers this list puts out are good numbers, and it is, in my opinion, going to be at least a tier 2 deck, the kind of thing you can keep in your back pocket going forward, with genuine potential to just be a good bounce equivalent deck. That is what this deck feels like. It feels like playing a better version of bounce right now, and I think that that is what it needs to be respected as and treated as. So, with all of that said, let's jump into the card-by-card breakdown before talking about some gameplay. But before we do that, I want to give a huge shout out to the person who created the deck, Dingy Alien. Huge shout out to you, and thank you so much for being willing to share the list with me after you beat my ass with it. Now, let's do the card by card. We're going to start with Headpool. Just baseline, this is a card that I do think makes this deck work in a meaningful way. It's a card that triggers and gets your stuff blown up, but you can replay later for more triggers on your destroys, and being able to be a Headpool / X-23 deck is where I think this deck comes out ahead against Morgan Le Fay, because that allows it to have multiple avenues of buffing its own cards. Morgan Le Fay's biggest downside is that it just doesn't have enough beef when it isn't Morgan Le Faying. But this deck can do things like copy a V-Hand, or alternatively, copy a Headpool and end up in a very powerful spot regardless. Duplicating Headpools is one of the strongest things you can do, and you can accomplish that with both Moira X and Moon Girl. So once you start doing stuff like that, you can understand how crazy the numbers really get. If you even do a Moon Girl, let's say your hand involves one Headpool, two Headpools, you end up playing two Headpools and a Venom on the final turn of the game. They both buff your entire hand by +2. The Headpools come back to your hand. You maybe get to play something like a Death in addition to that. Your whole deck is 1-drops. So you're basically getting like pretty close to a Morgan Le Fay kind of output in multiple different ways. Because you can also do this by getting a Moira X or a Moon Girl onto a Victoria hand, right? Like, you can get the same level of duplicating buffs, but there's just more ways to actually make it happen in this deck. Your opening hand matters quite a bit in this deck, and there are certainly some opening hands that are way better than others. Opening hands involving a Death are usually pretty good. Opening hands involving something that blows up other stuff is usually pretty good. It's like a Carnage especially. That kind of stuff is really good because it lets you start repeating your boom booms, which makes the whole deck flow just a lot better. Opening hands with Headpool in it are ridiculously good. All of that stuff is excellent. Moira X also, though, is just giving you cards that are the same as your other cards, but they get buffed by Victoria Hand, which of course means that Victoria Hand in your opening hand is another ridiculous Moira X thing. Now, keep in mind, this is a deck that is very points-oriented and very I'm attacking multiple locations-oriented while you're doing it. So having those buffs means that you get to distribute your points better. You're not really playing many just giant ladies. Only Death in this deck is a giant lady. So maybe you'll copy her and you'll have 2 12s. But the rest of the time, what you're really going to be doing is putting a bunch of reasonably sized 1s all over the board. And that's part of where the other piece of the synergy in this deck comes in, because you don't want your board space to be used up, so you destroy the stuff that's taking up your board space, opening up more board space and stacking points in it. You can start to see where this deck synergizes together now. Nico is really interesting because there's give and take with her, because managing your hand when you have Moira X and Headpool is actually kind of frustrating. You got to make sure that they trigger in the right order. Typically, you want to trigger your Moira X before your Headpool, but sometimes if you don't have space in hand, your Headpool won't come back to your hand at all. It'll just die. And so you really need to manage your hand in a concrete way that you have to think about kind of the entire game, which means that where Nico is normally amazing and goated because A, she gives you other cards that get buffed by V-Hand when you copy her, or B, she draws you 2 cards while blowing something up. Her other modes really don't do much, and those modes have a sort of mental tax on them where you have to actually think pretty hard about how this goes down. I'm not saying we're ever getting rid of her. By no means are we ever getting rid of this card. Just, you're really only playing her for those modes a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll use her for location control, and in a pinch, she could just be like a bigger lady. Once she gets a couple of Headpool buffs, her doubling on the final turn of the game could be like a reasonable thing to do. But generally speaking, you're focused on those 2 modes, and those 2 modes will require you to think about hand management to make sure that you don't end up wasting some of your cards. Squirrel Girl is the card I'm the absolute least sure should be in this deck. I showed it to Derek. His advice was to put a hood in here. I think that makes sense to me, just generally. I think Squirrel Girl is mostly in here so you have the ability to turbo out your deaths more easily, which is really important when you're copying deaths. But I do think that, if there's a lot of Mobius running around, you definitely don't want to be a Squirrel Girl gamer. You definitely would rather be a hood gamer. Hood, of course, another card that'll get buffed by a Victoria hand. Very reasonable to go that direction. It's also just a 1/6, the demon, I should say. The hood is not going to get buffed by Victoria hand. But there is something to be said about Hood being a pretty bad card to be copying a decent amount of the time. It's not the end of the world, but again, we talked about the additional tax on your hand and how hard it can be to manage your hand with a deck like this, beat with Nico, and that would also apply to the Hood. I'm playing it with Squirrel Girl currently because I just haven't seen a ton of Mobius, and I like the ability to copy my deaths and make them zeros, and that's just a really powerful thing to do. In a world where Mobius is more common, I can see trying the swap. Another potential swap out is Uncle Ben, but I've actually been really impressed with him. And you might be surprised to hear me say I've been actually impressed with Uncle Ben. The reason I'm impressed with Uncle Ben is that you are a deck that has basically no tech cards, right? You have a Killmonger, and that's kind of it for interaction, except for Uncle Ben. And Uncle Ben right now is actually kind of relevant because there are multiple decks that are looking to build one really, really powerful, important lane where the context of that lane is entirely dependent on multiple cards being in that lane together. And by that, I mean Jocasta decks, right? You have the ability to disrupt them with Uncle Ben. And there's not really another reasonable card you could play. You could try playing Lady Deathstrike. I don't think you actually want to be doing that. And so you end up with this being just, this is how we actually are able to keep their point output low. Because if you can prevent them from going X8 on a Jocasta, you can probably beat a 4x proc of Invisible Woman. But you don't have to. And you can definitely beat a 2x proc of Invisible Woman. So generally speaking, if you can just keep that deck off of building its Death Star Voltron thing, you should be able to beat them on points, and that is what Uncle Ben is doing right now. That's a pretty meta-specific use. He's also just, pretty good. It's nice to have a guy that blows up and gives a 2/4. That's hard to complain about him. But that specific use case is why I like him right now. There are so many situations where having 1 extra energy is so crucial, and there are even more situations where having 1 extra thing to blow up is so crucial. The reason this deck starts coming together after the release of Headpool is because Headpool gets to be combination X23 and Victoria hand. That's what this deck is using Headpool as, and it is just having that additional ability to play a card, blow it up. Get the extra energy. That's one additional proc of something else. So one additional 1-drop that you get to play before blowing things up, which is one additional death that is cheaper, which maybe is doubled because you are moongirling your death or Moira Xing your death or whatever it is. You have a lot of resources and a lot of ability to convert those resources into further resources. So the more you have energy to start that snowball, the better off you are. Carnage, make a da thing go boom. You are generally in desperate need of probably 2, sometimes 3, but most likely 2 things that go boom during the game. Carnage Killmonger, Carnage Venom, Venom Killmonger, whatever it is. You pretty much want 2 of them most of the time. And because you are a deck that has the ability to like generate copies of your opening hand and copy stuff, you have that ability to get to 2 of them. But it is still important that you have enough of them. Carnage is the cheapest and thus is the easiest to weave in. You're very happy with this card. The sort of crux of the deck is that there are multiple avenues to a similar place of power output that all synergize with each other. Moira X dies, it gives you more copies of other things to make your death cheaper. Those copies get buffed by Victoria Hand. You copy Victoria Hand with Moira X, with Moon Girl, with Nico Minoru, all of that stuff, right? Like there's all of this overlap built into the deck. And also while you're doing all of that, you know, you're making death cheaper. Maybe instead of copying Victoria Hand with Moon Girl, you copy death with Moon Girl. Maybe it's death with Moira X, whatever it is, right? Like you just have a lot of things that hook into each other here. The payoffs for Victoria Hand are obviously, if you copy her, that's ridiculous, right? Like you could do like Nico, Victoria Hand, Moon Girl. That's just a ridiculously strong thing to do, just baseline, right? And then you just play the Victoria Hand and the cards you Moon Girl, and it's like, oh, wow, look at all my guys, right? Like I've got 1,000,000 points. I've got just a bunch of guys. That's just really good to be doing full stop, but then also you get to do a bunch of other stuff while that's happening that gives you even more point output. Maybe you're blowing up some head pools. Maybe your Victoria Hand has a buff from that. Like there's just a lot of different paths to like having a bunch of units on the board that have 4 or 5 more points than they're supposed to. Killmonger is your only real interaction piece here, and he's not even an interaction piece if we're being realistic. You do get a pretty big buff when your opponent is playing 1-drops though, because that makes it almost guaranteed that your death is going to hit incredibly low amounts. When your opponent's playing like, you know, Black Cat and things of that nature, you are extremely happy to see that happen. Like you love that when you can get to Killmonger. There are matchups where Killmonger is the only important thing in the entire game. That will absolutely happen. He's a very powerful card. He is also extremely, extremely good in this deck because there are often going to be situations where you have more 1-drops than you do space in a lane. And so Killmonger is a good way to like say, blow up 5 1-drops. And you might be saying like, Cam, what do you mean blow up 5? How are you blowing up 5 1-drops? Honestly, with Moira X, it happens more than you think. Venom, just by virtue of costing 3, is probably worse than the other 2 destroy cards here. I'm not going to say he's actively bad, because he's definitely not. But just because he costs 3, he is a little bit harder to like make work in a guaranteed way. He isn't really all that much better than Carnage, because most of the things you're blowing up are like only going to give him the 2 power that Carnage would get anyway, right? So it's not like he's like eating enormous amounts of power and paying you off for that by like having a null payoff later in like you would in a normal destroy deck, or eating a giant scaling Deadpool. He's just like pretty good. Sometimes he's like 3-cost Carnage, but a little bit better. Generally speaking, he's the worst of your boom booms, but you care so much about having boom booms that he just is very, very solid. He's definitely not bad. It's just like this is the rare destroy deck where Venom is like a tertiary player and Carnage is like much more the star of the symbiote squad. Between Moon Girl and Moira X, you just kind of have a lot going on when it comes to what this deck is trying to do. Like you might be like, oh, what's the Victoria Hand doing? But like you're probably getting one of those cards, and that's what the Victoria Hand is doing. You're just doing points, dude. And even if you aren't doing it for that reason, like, okay, they're making your hand bigger so you can have more head pool procs. I'm duplicating deaths. I'm duplicating a Killmonger that my opponent doesn't know that I have. Like, that kind of stuff is just like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Does it sort of suck that Moon Girl costs 4? Yeah, and that's like the biggest place where X23 really comes in, is that when X23 is allowing you to play like Moon Girl plus something else, That's the kind of stuff that really helps your hand management and allows you to like not overfill your hand and like brick yourself. That kind of stuff is where X23 is really important. And so like, yeah, this card's cost it's a little obnoxious. It's not your favorite thing in the world, but it is a very powerful part of what this deck is doing. And I really can't stress enough. Like if you're doubling head pools, if you're doubling deaths, if you're doubling V hands, you're doing something pretty stupid. Your goal in this deck is to get death to 0 and moon girl it, but you shouldn't be married to that idea, in large part because, well, people still play Mobius. What I like about this deck is that it doesn't have to be like that. The problem is that, you know, Mobius really does take a huge dump on death right now, but luckily, at least as far as I'm concerned and this deck is concerned, there hasn't been as much of it in the immediate wake of the new season, largely I think because people are trying new things out. I'm not sure how this will shake out, but it does feel right now that of the decks that are in this space, this one is more vulnerable to Mobius than Bounce, and probably less vulnerable to Mobius than the version of Morgan Le Fay that does a similar thing to this. Gut check is that's what I would say. Because this deck has a lot more built-in power than the Morgan Le Fay deck. If you're getting Mobius in the Morgan deck and you don't draw Morgan, you just don't have numbers. Whereas in this deck, you have numbers that you can access outside of that. That said, it's not like you want to see Mobius, but like 0-12s are pretty ridiculous. This is what gives this deck the feeling of Bounce. Because without Bounce, it has like, without the free death, it has like a fairly similar to like a normal Victoria hand deck output, where you're like, all right, this is pretty good, but like I could be playing normal V-hand and Juggernaut, but then you're playing like 24 power for 0 energy some games, and you're like, okay, I get why I'm doing this now. And that's really what Death is about. Like, this is just a card that gives you some really massive high roll potential with both Moira X and Moon Girl. I mean, I've had games where it's like a 16 power death and a 14 power death for 0, because it's like 2 head pool procs and one of them's copied, so it's a V hand. Like, there's some ridiculous stuff in here. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one. We're going to do a double dose of decks in the next 2 videos. So tomorrow's video is going to be decks from the Golden Gauntlet, and of course, on Sunday, we'll have our usual best decks to climb. I think that will be an enjoyable dichotomy. Cool decks from good players playing in the Golden Gauntlet, and then the really dialed in, let's do a tier list type of thing. This deck is a deck I expect to be on there. I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe not in tomorrow's video because registration is due about the time that this video is scheduled to come out. So I'm not really sure. I did share it in the high elo chat, but I don't know if it's not really the kind of thing where I'm like, you guys have to play this. It was more just like, huh, that's kind of crazy. I'm a little surprised at how well this did. But generally speaking, I'm interested to see how this ends up going. And of course, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And I really do think that this list has the potential to be like, you know how people sort of look at like Bounce right now, where it's like, it's not really a tier deck, but everyone knows what it is and how it plays, how to play against it. It's not like special or anything like that, but it's just like a very solid list. I kind of think that this deck can exist in a similar space where it's like right now people don't know what it is and they don't respect it, and they need to. They have to respect this. It's very good. I'll do my absolute best. Okay, so I really want to get a copy so I can copy the Nico, the V-hand with the Nico and all that shit. Yo, Mikey4545, thank you so much for the Prime. I truly appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Most 1-drops here are a good draw, I believe. Something like that.
I'm about to juice this up.
Like that, maybe? This feels pretty interesting. All right, let's do it. Fascinating.
The throne.
Rest in peace.
Great power comes. Great power comes.
Well, another Killmonger dub. Another Killmonger dub, it seems. That's a second head pool.
Rest in peace.
I just need a guy that goes boom, dude. No guys that go boom? Okay, I mean, that sucks, but... Killmonger, Venom.
Wakanda forever.
Killmonger works. All right, so it's... Whoa.
I want the throne.
Impressive.
Great power comes.
Impressive.
Okay. So what do we think they're doing here? Zola the Null? What did that take it to? 22? What's 22 here? I guess the other problem is, what if it is 22, what's 15? So they'll be at 24. So we need, yeah, we can do 12. We can do 13.
Hail Hydra!
We should win. I can count. Yeah, no, I played around Galactus, the explicit province of the early emperors. Is Marshawn Lynch better than Sleepy Joe? I think neither are what I would play right now. Okay, if I get a Boom Boom here, we are so in business. That sucks. I hate doing it, but I think I have to do this.
Hey man, I'm Cook.
That's it. That's the move.
Oh, snap. I want the throne.
Rest
Great power
in
comes-
peace. Impressive.
So we get the head pools back. No, we don't. Okay. It doesn't work that way. All right, fine. Fuck it.
Rest
power
in
comes-
peace.
Gotta run, hun.
15. And then this is 5. What's 15 plus 5? 28? Oh, wait, no, it's also the lizard. We also have the lizard here. Okay. That's a rock. Thick as fuck, dog. Alrighty.
Victory.
I'll be honest with you. Nothing comes to mind. I want to play Headpool second in case I draw Moira X. Because Moira X in a game like this, if I'm not mistaken, is insane. I get V-hand Moira X.
Opponent.
Good second Headpool that was. I don't know what they're snapping on, though. It freaks me out. Huh. Dude, I'm about to play their Sarah. Holy shit.
Oh, snap.
I'm about to juice this up.
I don't care. I feel like what they think they're going to do is Killmonger my shit. Nice, dude. Yeah, I gotta admit I am a little concerned about that one. Unbelievable, dude. Just a tribunal gamer